Hey guys, this is Matt and Jesse, and this is chapter 1 of our classical D4 course. This is the chapter on the nimzo-indian. How are you doing tonight, Jesse?
I'm doing great. We're actually recording these chapters in reverse order, so chapter one is last for us. Let's get started with the Nimzo-Indian, chapter one. Nimzo, what highlights a Nimzo type of move order?
So the nimzo-indian is after D4, knight F6, C4, E6, and our repertoire is recommending knight to C3. This is kind of the most classical way to play this position, and the strongest way, in my opinion, to counter knight C3 is to pin the knight with bishop to B4. And I call this in the notes the most correct way to play it. This has been a classical defense that's been strong throughout the course of chess history, and it's just as strong today as it has ever been, even with the current engines that are out there.
Yep, moves other than bishop b4 here are pretty much covered in other chapters, is that right?
Yes, that's right. So we've looked at d5, that'll be a Queen's Gambit declined. c5 will go to a Benoni chapter, and b6, really you won't see that too often because it just gives us the big center right away, so that's not really, I don't think we have that covered in any of the chapters. So d5, c5, bishop b4, these are the main moves you're going to see. And bishop b4 is played 1.7 million times in the club database, and d5 is 870,000, and after that it drops below 200k. So almost
All right,
always you're going to be seeing Nimzo or Queen's Gambit declined.
cool. All right, so bishop b4. So we are officially in Nimzo-Indian territory, and we're going to play knight f3. And here there are a bunch of options for black. So we're going to look at, I see 6 options. Is there even more than that, or is it 6?
I think it is 6 options, and castling is going to account for 6 of the lines in this chapter. So we have 15 lines. Castling is going to account for 6 of them, and then we're going to talk about transpositions as we go along. So after castling, our recommendation in the Nimzo is going to be to do this combination of knight f3 and bishop to g5. And this is sort of just like a classical way to develop the pieces, right? We bring both knights out to the center. We nicely pin this knight on f6. And what we're going to see is we get these positions that tend to be pretty close to equal. So this is a very solid setup for black. But we're going to look for positional ideas that are consistent across the lines in this chapter. And we already have a couple sample files that are created for this course that we had ready even prior to setting up all these videos. One is Nimzo Games, so these are sample games to follow. And the other one is a positional ideas document that really highlights some different diagrams and talks about minor differences in positions and how to figure out the plans from there. So it's a very plan-based chapter, in contrast to some of our other chapters like the Benoni, where we played very aggressive.
Yep, and the Nimzo is probably one of the best ways to equalize or at least get a very good position for black. So that's why we're kind of compensating for, we don't have a stockfish edge here in a bunch of lines. Well, we maybe have a little one. So we're going to rely on our better planning and our better understanding of the position that we're going to end up in. So after bishop g5, again, pinning the knight, we have a few options. First thing we're going to look at is h6 kicking us away.
Yep.
So how are we going to want to respond to this?
After h6, we're always going to try to retreat the bishop back to h4, keeping this nice pin. And oftentimes if black plays too aggressively here with g5, we aren't castled kingside yet, so that could lead to us getting an attack, maybe by moving the bishop to g3. I'm playing pawn to h4. So really, after h6, bishop h4, for the most part, we get to keep this pin. So lines with c5 prior to d5 are going to be the closest lines to equality. So keep that in mind. When they play c5, it's going to be very close to equal. When c5 is played, oftentimes we will be recommending rook c1. And the reason for that is because it guards this knight on c3, and it slows down some aggressive plans by black when they bring the queen out to a5, piling up on this c3 knight. So c5, rook c1. And now this is actually preventing bishop a5 because we can meet that move with bishop takes f6, followed by a3, and there we have a pretty big advantage. So key point to remember, when you see c5 prior to d5, put the rook on c1 in those lines.
Yeah, makes sense. So rook c1, nice solid move there. Black is going to take our d pawn, c takes d4. We're going to recapture back with our knight. And then black, most common move here is knight c6, challenging our knight in the middle. So we have a bit of a decision here again. Do we want to chop this knight with our knight, or let them take us? So I don't see really any tangible benefit from taking this knight other than giving them a bigger center and allowing them a nice pawn push. So instead of going crazy, we'll just play e3, defend our knight. And if they want to take us, then we have a nice pawn center for ourselves.
Yes, that's right. And our plan is going to be bishop e2 and a quick kingside castle. And oftentimes black needs to play for this d5 break, otherwise this is going to be a weak pawn on d7. It would also be weak on d6. Once black plays d5, what we're going to do is we're going to exchange on d5, oftentimes leading to either an isolated queen pawn position or a position where we're going to be a little bit ahead in development or have an advantage with the imbalances. So that's going to be the plan, just a quick bishop e2 and castle. So let's look at the most common move, d5.
d5. So as Matt says, we're going to take the pawn, and black is in a decision right here. So they're going to take our pawn this way. So what is black weighing here other than e takes? Are they looking at a move like queen takes?
Yeah, e takes or queen takes. And I think queen takes is slightly more precise, but e takes is more popular. So let's look at the more popular move first, e takes. And this is where black accepts the isolated queen pawn. So what we're going to do here is play bishop to e2. And in the notes, I put that we're in really good shape here because there's almost no compensation for this isolated queen pawn. So usually when one side has an isolated queen pawn, they want to have the initiative or form some sort of attack. Here I think we're pretty safe and solid. And that leads to the most popular move for black here, pawn to g5. What do you think about this move?
It looks like they're lashing out a little bit. We can pretty safely retreat our bishop this way. Again, like Matt said just a few moves back, our king is not castled, so it could be potentially safer here in the middle. And we just go h4 and really break up, or just attack these extended pawns. I also wanted to point out that this isolated d pawn is a pretty bad isolated pawn because we have it nicely blockaded with the knight. We already have it attacked once with our knight, and we're going to be able to put a bishop on f3 and really pressure it. And I guess before this g5 move, we could have taken out this defender with our bishop. So after g5 here, we're of course going to drop our bishop back to g3, and this is a nice diagonal for our bishop anyway, so we shouldn't be sad about having to back it up. And these pawns are looking pretty extended, pretty bare king for black.
Yeah. And most players go for this same line for black, like pawn to g5, knight to e4, and they're going to play aggressively. So here we talked about some cases where you play h4. Here it's not going to work well because this knight hits g3. So our recommendation is to play this in a manner where we go against this isolated queen pawn. So we're going to castle kingside, keep this position really solid, and play against the IQP. So let's just kind of show a sample line, most popular moves for black in our recommendations. So bishop takes c3, have to take with pawn. Knight takes g3. We take back towards the center. This is all natural. Knight takes d4. Now here we have a choice. We could take with the queen or we could take with one of the pawns. Which move do you prefer?
This is a move that stuck out to me because both captures I think look really nice. So if you capture with the c pawn, we have this nice pawn chain, and we still get to play against this isolated d pawn. However, capturing with the c pawn kind of blocks our attack on the d pawn, so it's going to be a bit harder to attack that pawn. So instead, we're going to play queen takes d4 and immediately put pressure on this pawn. Notice we can swing a rook to d1 and even undermine with a move like c4, or we can put our bishop on f3. and up the pressure even further. So I think queen takes here is a bit more active, even though it looks a bit weird, leaving ourselves with these isolated pawns.
Yeah, and this was a case where I let the engine help make this decision. I think queen takes, the eval was around 0.7, and taken with the E and C pawns, it was somewhere in the 0.4 to 0.5 range. So all of these moves are very good and solid. I do like queen takes slightly better because it keeps this pressure on d5, and also she eyes the weakened black king position. So in terms of imbalances, this pawn's a little bit weaker than our c pawn, and this king is more exposed than our king, and we're slightly ahead in development. We'll have a rook very quickly come into the d file probably. Like Jesse said, we might play c4 or even e4 and break this center open soon.
Yep, so this is where we leave this position. So hopefully you have a good understanding of the imbalances here. As always, going to leave you with the plan at the end of each and every line.